I've been thinking a lot about my journey and how I came to be someone that walked Te Araroa from Cape Reinga down to Bluff. And it kind of started, well, it started a long time ago, as do most stories like this. But for me, I've always enjoyed being outside and enjoying nature and the wilderness and that, but it took me a long time to enjoy walking long distances. And I remember growing up and really hating going on a hike. And I was fortunate enough that we lived close to the Rocky Mountains. So we used to go to Banff, we used to go to Kananaskis and those sorts of areas and go on day hikes. And I hated it. I thought they were the most boring, mundane thing. And yeah, there might have been like little excitement there, here and there, where I got to see different things, but I never really understood the point of it. And it took me until I was later in my teenage years and not quite graduated high school, where I went out with some friends, and as friends, we planned a day hike. And I wasn't really sure what to think, other than I was excited to spend time with my friends. But that hike changed my perspective on how fun it could be to go out in the wilderness and reach a destination on foot. But it wasn't until a couple of years later that I started going overnight in the backcountry and walking my way in. And at the time, I worked with a colleague who had never been backcountry camping either. And so we decided to plan a weekend trip together. And I remember we didn't have all the gear and we didn't have the budget to buy all the gear. And we were also a little bit stubborn and thought we don't really need all the gear. So we went in and hiked our way in with a 3-man tent that you could stand up in, which is a ridiculous size when you're thinking about carrying it on your back, but it's also a ridiculous size when you're looking at camping in the Rocky Mountains where the temperature is quite cool overnight and there's only 2 of you in the tent. And so that was an experience on its own. Plus, I decided not to invest in a sleeping mat. So there was no barrier between my sleeping bag and the ground other than the tent floor. So that made an absolute cold and miserable sleeping experience. And then we also decided not to bring a gas cooker. We had none, we didn't want to buy one, and we thought, it's okay, we'll just eat bagels for dinner. I've never been more jealous of someone else's hot meal than that weekend when we sat near the other campers at the campground and they all had hot meals and we're sitting there trying to nibble on our bagels. To top it all off, because we were in the Rocky Mountains, there's obviously bears and other animals that are attracted to the smell of your food. So we had to place our food far enough away from the tent so that animals aren't coming to our tent, which is standard practice if you're ever in North American area where there's bears and other animals like that. I remember at the campground we were at, there was metal lockers that you could put your food in, which was great. But there was also tiny holes about that big where mice would get in. And we didn't know that at the time. But we found out quite quickly that they would get in and then they chewed through our plastic bags that we had stored our food, because we had stored all our food in Ziploc plastic bags. So we had a bunch of food that became contaminated and we couldn't even eat it. And this is all on a weekend trip. It could have been viewed as a complete disaster, but what ended up happening was we went on a day hike during one of the days and we walked our way to the Alberta British Columbia border. And when I saw that signpost that we were officially at the border to enter British Columbia and we managed to get there on foot, there was something that clicked in my head of how incredible it was to be able to walk somewhere on foot and be in the absolute wilderness. And I started to think that maybe this is something I'm really into. Maybe I would love to do more of this. And I did. But it wasn't much longer after that that I decided to walk across the width of British Columbia. And that was a couple years later. And at this point in time, I had my first weekend experience with that colleague. And then I had one more solo weekend trip where I had invested in a better tent, I had invested in a better cooker, and kind of upgraded my experience. But after that, I decided, let's go 1,000 kilometers across British Columbia solo. My reasoning was that I was intending to travel the world and I didn't know when I'd be back, and I wanted to experience all the Rocky Mountains had to offer before I left. And my mindset was that hitching as a single female was more dangerous than walking my way through the wilderness with a map route that I had chosen on my own was safer. So that's what I did. So it was Canada Day 2009, so July 1st or 1st of July, that my dad and sister dropped me off at Sunshine Village car park. And from there, I had this massive backpack and I walked for the next 49 days across British Columbia on my own. And that's wild to think of when I look back, because I still was such a novice at backcountry camping or long distance walking or anything in that realm of activity. But I loved it. Was it challenging? Yeah. Did I see bears? Yeah, I saw 3 bears. One was a grizzly. I saw a bobcat. I got lost. I climbed mountain passes. I was freaked out by the sounds of everything outside of my tent. I had mental breakdowns. I really struggled to convince myself to keep going at times. But I also learned so much. I learned that if you're carrying a heavy pack, that every gram counts. I learned that to do it having hiking boots as opposed to hiking shoes is more comfortable for my feet. I learned that maybe cotton isn't the best material to wear when you're doing that sort of activity. It's hard to list all the things I learned, but after 49 days, I had walked my way from Sunshine Village Ski Park all the way to Vancouver, and the feeling was the biggest high that I've ever had. And I was hooked, and I was like, this is something I would love to do again. Not now, because now my body is tired and I'm ready to travel the world. And so I worked my way to Australia, and that is where I started to consider that maybe I'd like to do something again. And when I was in Australia, I had only been there for, I don't know, maybe a month or two before I kind of thought, New Zealand sounds cool, and I'm going to look into that. And I kind of want to explore it on foot, and I want to do it in a different way than what other people have done it. And that's when I stumbled across someone else who had walked the length of the country, and I thought, that is it. That is what I want to do. But no one wanted to do it with me. And so I thought, well, here we go again. I'm going to do it solo, only now it's going to be 3,000 kilometers instead of 1,000. And it's going to be in a country I don't know. I don't know the wilderness. I don't know the wildlife. I don't know any people. But bring it on. Let's do it. That was the beginning of me wanting to be interested in Te Araroa. And with, as luck would have it, by the time I got my way over to Broome, I met another backpacker, Alex, and she was like, what are you doing planning for this adventure? And when I told her, she was the only person that was like, can I come too? And I thought, if there's this person that's crazy enough to want to do this as what I am, then who am I to say no? And that was it. I knew her for 4 days and we decided to do this together, and we did. We planned it, we walked it, we did it, and it's amazing to look back on. I don't for a second feel like I'm an expert by any means in tramping or hiking or long distance anything, because my experience, though I've walked a lot, I haven't had heaps of opportunity to upgrade my gear and change things along the way so that I improve my experience. I've had the lessons, but I've generally had to grit it out because I was always right in the midst of walking. And now with my son, I am able to pass on some of those lessons to him, which is so cool. So we are just starting to explore camping and hiking and that sort of thing with him, and yeah, it's amazing. So I'm hoping that through that, maybe I'll get better at my gear choices, and maybe I'll get better at upgrading things. But yeah, until then, I've never had the experience of ultralight camping, and I've never had the experience of walking with a GPS or even a personal locator beacon. I've never had an emergency device. I've never, never had solar panels attached to my backpack or a phone that was a smartphone that I could check in with. Everything that I've done is very old school, and I wouldn't trade it for the world. But I also know that there's lots of different ways of being in the wilderness that maybe are more efficient, or maybe are easier on the body or easier on the mind and mental health. And yeah, I'm curious to see what's next to come. But if you're ever wondering what my journey is and what brought me to the point of getting to Te Araroa, it was a very quick succession of realizing that I enjoyed the idea of being able to walk somewhere on my own 2 feet. There was definitely other elements to it. I've always enjoyed reading travel adventure books, and really got into reading about Colin Angus and all of his adventures, which is absolutely incredible if you ever get a chance to read his books. And that really pushed me to understand that there's so much out there to explore and see and do that you can do without being assisted by motorized vehicles or airplanes and that sort of thing, that you can do just by your own determination and grit to get from point A to point B. And yeah, so anyway, my memoir about this whole experience of walking Te Araroa, I hope it inspires some of you to get out there in the wilderness and test your limits and see where you can get to. And in the meantime, enjoy my frizzy hair. It's a little bit rainy today, so it's quite humid. But yeah, look forward to chatting more.